So you remember that was the one involving the saxophone, 16 and 15 years old. There was a taxi driver who was a suspect because his cab was seen in the vicinity of the crime scene. Obviously, that led nowhere. They received a lead from the band leader of the band that she was in, that she had her saxophone with her, and so that excited a lot of interest with the police, the saxophone. Again, it's too bad they didn't search the woods around the body a little more carefully and find the saxophone. They wouldn't have wasted so much time.
Right.
So a guy was arrested in Corpus Christi, Texas for trying to sell a saxophone in a music store. He walked in without an instrument and asked the salesperson if they wanted to buy an Alto Bundy saxophone. Anyway...
well, he didn't, and what was weird is he didn't have it.
He didn't have it. He just came and says, theoretically, would you like to buy a saxophone? And the clerk claimed that the man seemed nervous. The man left when the manager was summoned. They contacted the police, and he was arrested 2 days later at a waterfront hotel after purchasing a .45 revolver from a pawn shop. That's not suspicious, but no, it's not really. I mean, obviously, the real killer, if he was going to purchase something from a pawn shop, it would be a .32 automatic.
Of course.
Of course, yeah. So he was identified by the sales girl as the same man who tried to sell the saxophone. They didn't find any saxophone in his possession, although in his hotel room they found a bag of bloody clothing. He claimed that the blood was from a cut he'd received in his forehead in a bar fight. They grilled him for several days, and apparently everything he told them was checked out, and it was all true. So the police, in the end, decided that they really couldn't hold the guy. They had no case. I mean, offering to sell somebody a saxophone is, and as it turns out in the end, since we know the saxophone was later found in the shrubbery near her body, obviously.
It was a bit of a red herring.
This guy might have been a bit of a questionable character, but obviously he had nothing to do with the murder.
Right. And in the murder of Virgil Starks and the attack on his wife, several people were found in the vicinity of their home, and they were all stopped and questioned. 12 people were detained. 9 of them were basically immediately released, and then the same thing, the remaining 3, their alibis checked out, and they were released as well.
They had some people that were obviously more persons of interest than others. A lot of people washed out in the beginning of their alibi checked out very clearly. They didn't seem to actually fit any kind of profile, but there were some really interesting ones, one of which was a German prisoner of war suspect. So on May 8th, it was announced that an escaped German prisoner of war was considered a suspect, and he was hunted as a matter of routine. He was described as a with brown hair and blue eyes. He stole a car and then attempted to buy ammunition in lots of places in Oklahoma. So the night before his apprehension on May 7th, a black man named Herbert Thomas was flagged down by a hitchhiker. The man said that he needed a ride because his mother was seriously ill and offered $5. Thomas fell for the sob story, basically. He said, I wouldn't normally pick someone up, but he told a really sad story. When they got close to the place that the hitchhiker said he was going, the hitchhiker pulled out a pistol and told Thomas to keep driving or he would kill him, like the 5 people he killed in Texarkana, mentioning Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker by name, which would have been suspicious except for, there's such a snowball fear. It's everywhere.
Yeah, it's almost an easy story to use.
Super easy, yeah. He made Thomas stop in a small town and told him to drive back, and then if he followed him, he would trail him and kill him. He also told Thomas that he had planned to go back to Texarkana to kill Martin's father, which is a little weird, right?
Yeah.
It's a little weird.
Because his father was already dead, which was even weirder.
Yeah. So the man stole back the $5 that he had given to Thomas, as well as an additional $3 in that time. Some substantial amount of money.
That's decent money in the 1940s.
A couple hundred, not even a couple $100.
It's $20-$30.
Yeah, but that's a good amount.
Yeah.
So Thomas drove back to Kilgore, the place that he was originally going, and immediately reported it. He was described as being about 5'8", 130 pounds, and about 27 to 28 years old, with red hair and wore khaki trousers. On the same night, May 7th, a local resident named Robert Atkinson spotted a peeping Tom in his window. Atkinson grabbed a flashlight and pursued, but the man escaped. Atkinson got in his car and went looking for him. He caught the man he believed to be the peeping Tom and put him under citizen's arrest, but the man said, no, that wasn't me. So Atkins said, okay, I guess that wasn't you, and let him go. He later heard about the story with Thomas and decided that he should probably tell the police, and described a man very, very similar to what Thomas had described his hitchhiker looked like. And Gonzalez stated that, quote, "We don't believe the man who killed 5 people here in the past 6 weeks would boast about his crimes and then let the Negro go." It's not totally sure if he was the prisoner of war, if what necessarily happened.
Is it the same guy?
Is it the same guy?
Circumstantial
It's really
links.
circumstantial, and they're saying that he kind of vanished into thin air.
Yeah, well, plus, talk is cheap. Anybody who reads the papers can say, hey, I killed all them people in Texarkana.
Yeah.
It would have an intimidating effect.
Yeah.
There was another suspect. This obviously, again, didn't go anywhere. This guy was, May 10th, Toka, Oklahoma. So this was not long after the last murders. A man walked up to a woman's house and opened her screen door. Asked the person living there, Mrs. Harmon, if he could have some turpentine, food, and money. Now, that's a puzzler. I really want some turpentine and some food and some money. So she told the man that she had very little turpentine and no money or food. So then he grabbed her by the hair, dragged her out onto the porch, said he might as well kill her, since he had already killed 3 or 4 persons and he was going to rape her. Then he heard a horse galloping towards them and took off. So she took her child with her to a neighbor's house and called the police, and there was a neighborhood search of the man, which included 20 officers and about 160 civilians. She had described him as 5'9" to 5'10", white, 45 years old, 150 pounds, dark hair, and badly in need of a shade, carrying a 5-inch folding pocket knife, wearing gloves, faded blue short with khakis, and an old dirty dark-colored floppy hat. So they found a suspect that fit that description. He was 33 years old, didn't quite match in all respects. He was also clean shaven. They decided to keep him in the jail for about 3 weeks, and so his beard would grow back, and then she could look at him again and decided if he fit the description. But it turns out that they checked out his story, and again, talk is cheap. So it does not appear this lead against didn't really pan out. It's kind of, thinking about the amount of police man hours that went into investigating this whole thing.
Yeah.
There's lots and lots of investigative time spent by multiple bureaus.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so there's another suspect. There are a lot of suspects.
There's a lot of suspects.
A lot. And this guy came forward on May 23rd. He's 21 years old. He was an ex-Army Force B-24 machine gunner. His name was Ralph Bauman, and he was in Los Angeles. He turned himself in to the police, and he said he might be the Phantom. He said he's been in a coma, running from something, maybe murder. He wanted to clear it up, and he said if he didn't kill 5 people in Texarkana, he wants to settle down and be a stuntman in Hollywood because he was the happiest when he was living in danger. And then he told a reporter, quote, "I want to sell you some murder information. I know who and where the Texarkana killer is. Give me $5 and let me have an hour's start, and I'll put the information in a sealed envelope." The reporter called the police, obviously.
Yeah.
And he read the note, and it said, "On a certain day in March, I was in a Texarkana theater watching a Path movie."
Watching a news picture of the war?
News picture of the war, thank you. "And when a party of persons acted wise and said overacting, it kind of got to me. I followed them home. I killed them within a period of 3 days." So
yeah, that's a little.
I'm finding it hard to believe the reporter actually gave him $5.
Yeah. So the police arrested this man who was a redhead. So let's just throw that out there.
Matching some of the descriptions that we got in.
He was in a downtown shooting gallery. He had just shot his 23rd bullseye in a row with a .22 rifle. So again, something. Yeah. Bauman is quoted to have said, "I'm my own suspect." He said he was in a coma for several weeks. I think that he really means he was blacked out for several weeks. That he just doesn't remember. He has no memory of, not that he was in a coma, like he was incapacitated in a hospital.
Right.
And he said he woke up from it and he felt like he was running from something. He had come to on May 3rd and his rifle was missing, and he'd heard about a suspect matching his description, which would have been the prisoner of war suspect. Mm-hmm. He hitchhiked all the way to Los Angeles because he thought he was running for murder. He was discharged from the Air Force for being a psychoneurotic.
Yeah, that almost sounds like he's proclaiming something just to get attention.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
Gonzalez was quoted as saying, "I feel the man is certainly a mental case. The Texarkana killings could not have been the work of a mental case. This man has absolutely no facts."
Yeah, well, and another one that we've got is that the police arrested a 30-something-year-old black man based on the fact that his tire tracks were found on the opposite side of the road from Paul Martin's corpse.
I feel like it's 1940s. How many different tires are there?
Well, I think there actually was quite a few.
Huh.
But the thing is after the police detained him, and after he failed a polygraph test, because he was still denying everything, and then he, of course, does a polygraph and doesn't pass it, they decide that they're going to hypnotize him. He was taken to a psychiatrist and hypnotized, at which point the hypnotist said, "You've got the wrong man, and this guy has no criminal tendencies." It eventually came out that after having been arrested by the police, the reason that he had been lying about why he was doing what he was that he said, "Okay, here's what really happened. I pulled over and I needed to use the restroom, so he urinated on the side of the road and then drove away." But he was lying the whole time, and the reason he failed the polygraph is he was trying not to disclose the fact that he was having an affair with a married woman.
Oh.
So he was trying to protect himself and her at the same time, and that didn't go so well.
Yeah.
That's a little bit of a puzzle to me, because I don't know how you can hypnotize somebody against their will. It's a little...
I suspect that he didn't have a problem being hypnotized so much. He knew
he didn't do it.
He knew he didn't do it, and
Maybe.
I think he also probably knew, it's some doctor-client privilege here. That he could have said.
I don't think that was strictly enforced.
Yeah.
No, but I think,
1946.
a psychiatrist isn't going to say, "Oh yeah, he's having an affair." He's going to say, "Well, he didn't murder him," right? Or he did murder them.
But what I love about it is, the police were a little skeptical too. Apparently, according to this story, and of course, as we know from long, hard experience, stories tend to get a little bit modified.
Right.
But if it's true, it's pretty funny, because in a sort of appalling way, because the psychiatrist who hypnotized him, because the police were skeptical, well, is he really under? Is he really hypnotized? So he basically told the suspect that you basically have no feeling in your left side whatsoever, and then took his cigarette and stuck it on the guy's arm and burned him.
Really? I didn't read that.
And he didn't react at all upon being burned with a cigarette. And then,
wow.
and so that's why the police were convinced that, wow, I guess he really is hypnotized. I like this, the casual way you go ahead and
the
burn
way
the
the
guy.
law worked at that time.
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, let's see. There's another one. This is obviously just BS. Some guy was a drunk. One of the local sheriffs traveled to Shreveport, Louisiana, after being notified that the police there were holding a man in custody for confessing to the crimes. He was arrested at a bar. When he told his story to a news reporter, he didn't know the guy was a news reporter. The reporter promised the man a fifth of whiskey if he would tell all. And so he told all. And so the police picked him up after the reporter ratted him out.
Right.
And then when Tillman Johnson, the sheriff's deputy, arrived in Shreveport, he recognized the guy. He was an alcoholic from Texarkana and who had confessed to the crime before. And he called the guys out by name and says, "You know you didn't kill those people. What'd you go and do this for?" And then the guy replied, "Well, hell, I got a fifth of whiskey out of it." So, another false confession. Don't worry, folks. I know you're getting impatient. You want us to solve the crime, and we will, but you got to go through all this first.
This thing is full of so many weird confessions.
Yeah.
And here's, okay, so the next one that we got is got weird confessions in it. Let me just run it.
Yeah.
All right, so one of the Arkansas State Police officers had realized that a car had been stolen on each of the nights or nights previous to the murders, and then was found abandoned after the fact. So on June 28th of 1946, this officer, Max Tackett, went and found a car that had been reported stolen in a parking lot, and he staked that car out. So he knew this car was stolen, so he watches it. And a 21-year-old woman walks up and starts to get in the car, and he, of course, confronts her. She says, well, I've just been married, and my husband, who is in Atlanta, he stole the car, and he's in Atlanta selling another car that he stole. So the guy was obviously, fencing hot cars all the time. So they go and they try and track him down, and they had found somebody that this guy had tried. His name, by the way, was Yoel Swinney, and Yoel had evidently tried to sell the guy a car at one point, and the guy said, no, I don't want to buy this car for whatever reason. So the cop said, well, you would recognize him, right? Well, yeah, I would. So they went with him to the city bus depot, I believe. When Yoel saw the guy that he tried to sell the car to with a cop, he turned around and ran. This state police officer, caught him, wouldn't let him go, obviously, got him, knocked him down, whatever it was, cuffed him. And at that point, they were going to go ahead and haul him in. Well, the weird things that come up with him is that when they put him in the car, Yoel says, hell, I know what you want me for. You want me for more than stealing cars. Which is a little weird. And he said that statement more than once.
Yeah, and he said, you guys are going to give me the chair, aren't you? And then Tackett, I recall, said something like, well, no, we usually don't give people the chair for stealing cars.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Except that everybody's like, wait, this is a little weird. When they interviewed his wife, when they had him in custody, she knew some details about the murders that hadn't been released. She knew the details inside and out, which was a little odd. But she also knew about the fact that there was a date book that had been found at the murder of the Martin and Brooker murder scene that the police hadn't told anyone about. And so these things are adding up. Suddenly we're getting an avalanche of information.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, Yoel turns around and clams up and says, nope, I don't know what you're talking about. Nope, I'm not talking. I'm not doing anything. So being great detectives, they decide that they're going to go ahead and what is it? They decided they were going to give him sodium pentothal, thank you, which is a truth serum. It's basically going to make you talk. Except, unfortunately, they gave him too much, and it knocked him out.
Oh.
So he was unconscious. As they began to build an investigation against Yoel, his wife suddenly did a 180 and refused to talk to the police anymore and denied ever saying anything about the murders. And because of the law at that time, she couldn't be made to testify against her husband, and so she was considered an unreliable witness. So they couldn't pursue him for the murders. He eventually was put in jail for about 20 years for multiple car thefts, but they could never pin him to these murders.
Huh.
That might explain, though, if he was locked away and if he actually was a murderer, then maybe that could explain why they stopped.
Yeah,
well, maybe, but there's some details that we're going to get into because there's some aftermath. But let's keep walking through some of these people.
Well, I mean, that's one of the ones that's like really compelling, right? And this one I think is really compelling too. And on November 5th, 1948, so a couple years after these murders, an 18-year-old freshman, he called himself Doobie Tennyson, from Arkansas University, found dead at home in Arkansas. He'd killed himself with cyanide of mercury, and there was a suicide note, and it read, "The opening of my box will be found in the following few lines. In a tube of paper is found, rolls on color, and it is dry and sound. The head removes, the tail will turn, and the inside of the sheets you yearn. Two bees mean a lot when they are together. These clues should lead you to it." So his suicide note was a riddle. He was basically kind of toying with his police or whoever. But obviously police were notified of this, and so they found another note inside of a fountain pen, and there was poison on the cap, and there were clues that like led them on this goose chase to a lockbox that had a combination lock on it, and since they weren't really in the mood for games, they decided to just blow the lock off the box instead of trying to
pry the thing open.
Yeah, they just pried it open instead of trying to like figure out the combination. And there was a note in there. So inside that box, among other things, they found this final farewell note that was not a riddle. In which he thanked the people who were bringing him up. He professed his love to a 12-year-old girl, and he also confessed to some of the murders. He says, "Why did I take my own life? Well, when you commit 2 double murders, you would too. Yes, I did kill Betty Jo Brooker and Paul Martin in the city park that night, and then killed Mr. Starks and tried to get Mrs. Starks. You wouldn't have guessed it, I guess, when my mother was either out or asleep, and no one saw me do it. For the guns, I disassembled them and discarded them in different places." And then he goes on to list things that he wants for people to be given.
The weird thing about him is, I don't know if you saw this in some of the research that's out there. Mm-hmm. So he hand wrote these letters out before he typed them up.
Yeah.
And then they found other notes from him that were drafts, and then follow-up version that's something along the lines of, "Please disregard the previous notes that I wrote."
Yeah.
Which is just strange.
Yeah, he was a weird guy. I mean, I can't totally figure out what is going on. It's clearly a very troubled mind beyond just the suicidal tendencies. The fact that, you would kill yourself with this riddle note that leads people on a goose chase is kind of like, at least in movies, indicative of a kind of a psychopathic character. Mm-hmm. And if he was in love with 12-year-old girls,
there's something not
totally there. So I don't really know what to make of that. He doesn't confess to all of the murders or all of the
only
attacks.
A couple of them.
Only some of them. And he may have been capable of it. So I don't know.
Well, and the hard part is, I remember the research that talked about his other notes that he had written was the fact that his friends because he was from that area, who then, heard about his suicide, said, "Oh yeah, no, there's no way that he could have done that murder because he was with us that night."
Uh-huh.
Now, is it someone coming forward saying, "Yeah, I'm sorry, he was troubled and he really didn't do it," or, "Yeah, he took his own life. Let's go ahead and cover for him and protect him for time honored." Again,
possible.
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
It's also possible that he confessed to the suicide note because he was protecting somebody else who he knew committed the murders.
It was the 12-year-old.
Yeah.
It was the
It could have been
12-year-old.
the 12-year-old.
Yeah, it could have been the 12-year-old
who knows?
Chupacabra.
Yeah.
Chupacabra. Yeah, I like that. All right, so let's see. There was another murder on May 7th. This is right after the Starks were murdered. Virgil Starks was murdered. So, and not necessarily related, but a body was found on the Kansas City Southern Railway tracks about 16 miles north of Texarkana. He was lying face down beside the track with his head to the north. His left arm was severed at the elbow and his leg was severed at the hip because they were across the tracks. A freight train had passed about 5:30 a.m. and chopped him off. So it was taken to a funeral home. Yeah, that sounds unpleasant. The coroner's verdict stated death at the hands of persons unknown and that he was dead before being placed on the railroad tracks.
Okay.
So we got a potential 6th victim.
Yeah. So so you kill him and then you toss him in the tracks just for the fun of it. But the county sheriff there believed that the man had died because he fell under the wheels of a passing freight train. The coroner examined the body a second time and found further evidence of murder. They explained, "We found a deep cut over the man's temple, 2 inches wide and 1.5 inches long, which would probably be enough to cause death." They also found cuts about his hands and wrists, which indicate that those are defensive wounds. Somebody's coming at you with a knife. You usually try to block the knife with your arms.
Yeah.
So he was defending himself from somebody with a knife. So apparently he was either very deeply wounded to the point where he couldn't defend himself and then thrown under the train, or he was killed and then his body thrown on the tracks. But the coroner believed that he was dead for a full 2 hours before being put on the tracks, and that there wasn't enough blood around the wounds which caused his death. In other words, the wounds that caused his death bled out somewhere else, and he was taken to the tracks.
Yeah.
So that yet another reason. There was blood found in the street near the crime scene, which supports that theory. The sheriff still believes that it was accidental, and the man was probably trying to jump the train and just fell under the wheels. but the coroners believed differently. So the man was finally identified, Earl Cliff McSpadden, from a Social Security card that he had on him. His brother contacted the funeral home after hearing about his death on the radio, and he reported that his brother was a transient oil storage tank builder, which is an interesting thing to be transient over. He's like,
So it's basically
travel.
He was basically a guy on the road working.
Yeah, kind of on the road.
Down to.
Yeah. So anyway, it appears that was completely unrelated, although you never know. I mean, there's no .32 caliber bullet holes in the guy. So
there are other deaths at the time that seem unrelated but could be. There were two women before, I think it was just before or just after the Stark murder. A woman was found dead in the street, shot by a .32, and then another woman was found dead with a .32 at her feet, and they don't fit the profile, except that they're at the same time in the same town with the same caliber of weapon.
Yeah, it's weird that they aren't classed with these.
But, and it's possible, but again, back in those days, .32 caliber was very popular and very common.
That's the hard part is, okay, well, yeah, a lot of people had that gun.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't know, and nobody was ever charged with the murders of these two women. So we don't know, are they the 7th and 8th victims, or are they just unrelated?
Yeah. Yeah. So there are a couple things that come up in this that are kind of interesting. One of which is years after the murders, they were about to demolish a school in Texarkana. And they were going through and clearing everything out, and they were going through the attic, and a pile of bloodstained clothing was found in the attic of this elementary school that they were about to demolish, which is a pretty kind of creepy thing.
Now, I thought I saw something that it turned out that was actually just paint-stained clothing.
I don't know, maybe.
I don't know. I remember that bit of evidence, but...
The thing, that's really interesting is that, and I only saw this one place, but again, I want to bring it up, is that it seems to be that most of the files and evidence that Texarkana and Texas law enforcement agencies should have on this case are gone. And maybe that's just age, but it is open murder investigations. It's never been solved.
The files have just disappeared.
But it seems the files have just kind of disappeared.
No, that's not unusual. The government moves stuff all the time.
They do, and there was a rumor going around. The suspected phantom killer was rumored to be from a, quote, well-to-do Texarkana family.
So they knew who he was, but they couldn't pursuing him because his family had so much influence.
Yeah.
That seems unlikely.
Well, but that's the stuff. This whole thing is, as the bad movie that was made, stuff of movies.
Yeah,
and
totally.
We can't go after the guy that we know who did it because his family will bury the whole thing.
Yeah.
So that
maybe they did bury the whole
thing.
thing.
If we go through the Hollywood venue, that theory right there kind of makes sense. I'm not saying it's sound, but
in Texarkana, are there any actual well-to-do families?
Well, they're due for Texas.
Oh,
Texarkana.
okay.
I don't know.
They have
This
two
is
cars.
the 40s.
Yeah.
People, were rich that didn't seem to be rich because people were making fortunes all over the place.
Yeah, and the other really interesting connection that you see all over the internet is a connection to the Zodiac murders.
Yeah.
Which I kind of like. There's some interesting connections. And, it's like 20 years later. It's in 68 and 69 as the Zodiac murders, right? So I guess when we were talking about the car thief, he went away for like 20 years, right? And then came back out. And he seemed to be a really viable. Murders of this type disappeared for 20-ish years and then
but the problem with Yoel is that he was still in jail when the Zodiac happened.
Oh, he was.
And here's the other thing is that what basically put the nail in the coffin for him being the killer was that in South Florida, I believe it was, there was at least one or if not two double murders in the late 60s that took place with a 38 on Lover's Lane.
So
38 or 32?
Or 32, excuse me.
Yeah.
Correct.
So they talk about the similarities with the Zodiac crimes. And I think it's interesting, the time periods kind of fit. If you take the Texarkana murders and then you take the Florida murders, we were talking about if it had maybe been a teen in Texarkana who shipped off to the war for a couple years, he was getting his murder fix in there, came back, went to Florida because it's a nice place to be for a little while, and then
commits a few murders.
And then, because, the drive is there, right?
Yeah,
but
if it's a psychotic drive, it doesn't go away. It just
away.
gets sated.
Yeah. So in the Zodiac crimes as well as our crimes, right, the suspect wore a hood. The suspect used a flashlight to blind victims in cars. The